Hello and welcome. This is part 2 of 3 in regard to Brian Simmons and his Passion Translation. What text is Victor Alexander translating from? We'll just go through this briefly, as it seems like it's a repeat of what was said in the first and second videos, part 1 and part 2. But it has a little extra. Part 2 has a little extra. We'll have a look at that. Okay, it's all about the Church of the East and what Victor N. Alexander, the translator from Mesopotamia, Syria, of the Tab Asherate and the Galilean Aramaic, Old Testament, New Testament, had to say for himself, and this person, Andrew Chapman's doubts, and so forth. Okay, him saying that Victor N. Alexander probably translated his Aramaic text from the Syriac Peshitta. We've already covered that, where he was, but then he was told by a high priest of the Church of the Apostolic Church of the East that it was wrong, that Syriac version that he was translating from was actually wrong. So he was shocked, and then he eventually bought a Bible format copy of the original manuscripts that were hidden, therefore preserved, for over 2,000 years by that Apostolic Church of the East. And then he, after a year of going through a depression because of what he thought he was translating from was right, was actually wrong, he decided to go back and he completed the Galilean Aramaic New Testament, and when his site went down, va.com, which we've revived, he resumed work on it, and then he stopped at a certain time because he's got medical problems, etc., like that sort of thing, right? Finances are a bit low and so forth, so maybe you want to contribute to his pages. He may talk about under one of his videos on YouTube the story of Adam and Eve. Just put in the search on YouTube the Aramaic scriptures, and you'll see an elderly man with white hair and a brown hat showing you his translation of the original ancient Tab Asherate Brita, or Genesis, that he translated into English, and has a winged disc icon on the front, and he explains that. And underneath in the comments somewhere you may be able to get hold of him and find out how you can donate to him, etc., etc. So these his website can go back up. It's optional. One of these at the bottom here, it might have his comment and his email address. We're pretty sure it's here somewhere. Just have a look, see if you can find it, because he did leave a comment. And here we go. So if this is still valid, it's down here. Okay, and his translations are available through Amazon. You may be able to get a better deal if you get hold of him here. It'll be way cheaper. Post free, post charges free. There's no postage and handling. He's really nice like that. You can go check him out as well at Amazon. The original NT and the Aramaic New Testament, the Old Testament scriptures, ancient language, ebook, etc. There's a little comment here from him last year. This is wonderful. I am now 81, living on Social Security in Glendale, California. I don't have the money to post my Church of the East Bible translation on the internet, but I published them through Amazon.com. They can be found under books in my name, Victor N. Alexander. Okay. And you can contact me there at that email address there with a genuine request. We may do that because we want to help him by posting his website without any problems up on a certain website in one of our accounts, but we don't know if he'll reply or not. Anyway, back to the gist of part 2 here. It's mainly information that's we feel has been repeated in the first and second part. Okay, this person again claims that Victor Alexander, translated from Mesopotamia, Syria, who speaks many Aramaic dialects, Persian, Norwegian, has translated from the Peshitta. That's incorrect, because it has here. One of the mistakes that he made at the very beginning was assuming that the modern Syriac translation of the Peshitta was authentic work of translating. This he had already translated the Gospels of Mark and Matthew and all that in that order. Then he had a conversation one day with an old Church of the East priest. He told him that he had been translating the Bible from Syriac into English for the sake of sharing the authentic Aramaic Bible with his American friends and English-speaking people. At this time he did not say very much, this is that priest, except for smiling when he thought it was approval, what he thought was approval from that priest, right? But in a further conversation, the priest told Victor Alexander the Syriac is all wrong. At a later meeting he asked him what he was doing. The priest asked Victor what he was doing. He said that he was still translating the Bible. Then he had to tell him, he said, the Syriac is all wrong. Talk about being shocked. He had just finished translating Matthew and was getting ready to translate John. He had already translated Mark before he met the priest for the first time. Okay, and he asked him questions about it. And he told him, no, this Syriac version was translated by the Protestants and Catholics from the Greek versions, and so forth. So he purchased a copy of the official Ancient Church of the East New Testament book from him. He began reading Mark and later Matthew. He was amazed. It was different. Okay, so he purchased a copy of the official Ancient Church of the East New Testament, not the old, by the looks of it. But he has translated the original ancient 3,000 year older than the Bible cuneiform text, Mesopotamian cuneiform text, the Tab Asserted, and so forth. And he goes into the history of the American missionaries that came to Urmi and translated King James version, or the most popular version, into English, into the Syriac, and made a botched job. Okay, there's all the information there. So now we're going to jump to the final part, which is part 3 of Brian Simmons and his Passion Translation, because this person probably points out Brian Simmons as well. A problem restated. The reason for the person's this Andrew Chapman's long series of posts about Brian Simmons and his so-called Passion Translation is that sincere Christian believers are reading it, believing it to be a genuine English version of the Holy Scriptures, translated from the original text, when in fact it is fraudulent, so far as this author Andrew Chapman could see. In many cases where there is an unusual rendering of a verse, Simmons says in a footnote it is translated from the Aramaic. In his frequently asked questions section, or facts, he identifies his Aramaic text as the Peshitta, making it possible to compare his English text with the original from which it is said to be translated. Andrew Chapman investigated the first 10 such claims in his translation of Galatians and found none of them to be substantiated. What he did find, however, was that in the majority of cases he was following Victor Alexander's so-called Aramaic New Testament, which, as its name implies, claims to be a translation of Aramaic scriptures. In these cases, Alexander's English text, like that of Simmons, does not seem to be translated from the Peshitta, okay, because it's translated from the original ancient Galilean Aramaic, which is a long dead language, and he found a method to do that, and to bring the translation into what was said into the nearest English equivalent without translated bias, prejudice, etc., etc. The question then arises as to whether Victor Alexander might be translated from some other Aramaic source text. In recent years he has constantly refused to say what his source is. He sometimes gives the impression that he may have manuscripts older than the Peshitta with a different text. For example, as he explained in an earlier post, he has covenant of the Son of Man in Galatians 3:15 rather than human covenant as in both the Greek and the Peshitta, and then says in footnote that only an ancient Aramaic retains the correct meaning of this passage, as if perhaps there was some text more ancient than the Peshitta which had this form of text here, the Galilean Aramaic from the 1st century AD to probably about the 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th copies. More directly, he has implied that he is in possession of the oldest manuscript found, which might further suggest that it is one not known to others, and he didn't need to prove that the manuscript he's translated from is the oldest found, because he got it from a high priest of the restored Apostolic Church of the East. So it's a hidden, therefore preserved manuscript for over 2,000 years. And more information on that translation and comparisons with other Syrian translators, etc., and what they translated. It has George Lamsa, who supposedly left out the Trinity, but we're not too sure on that. He left out the Triune Godhead in his version, but we find that maybe he didn't. And here is what was up on Messianic Jew Andrew Gabriel Roth's website, the AramaicsScriptures.com, but was taken down. This statement: in 1957, Mar Ishai Shimon, the then patriarch of the Church of the East, he was assassinated in 1975 on his doorstep, wrote to Collins, now HarperCollins, the publisher of George Lamsa's translation of the Peshitta, the Holy Bible from ancient Eastern manuscripts, to confirm that the Peshitta is the text of the Church of the East. In the same letter, he also made a strong claim of Aramaic primacy, but this need not concern us here. And why not, we ask? The author's current purpose is only to demonstrate that the Peshitta is the text of the Church of the East. Okay, but what the High Priest is saying to Victor Alexander is that particular one that he translated from, whether it's the Peshitta or the Western Peshitta, is wrong. And it has information here. Patriarch of the East, Modesto, California, April 5th, 1957. With reference to your letter concerning Lamsa's translation of the Aramaic Bible and the originality of the Peshitta text, as the Patriarch and head of the Holy Apostolic and Catholic Church of the East, we wish to state that the Church of the East received the Scriptures from the hands of the Blessed Apostles, Thomas, etc., themselves in the Aramaic original, the language spoken by our Lord Jesus Christ, or Yeshua Mashiach himself, and that the Peshitta is the text of the Church of the East, which has come down from the biblical times without any change or revision. So it's the original, ancient, very old, unchanged manuscripts that were hidden for 2,000 years, therefore preserved by this Apostolic Church of the East, or the original Church of the East. And that's attested by Mar Ishai Shimon, by Grace Catholic Co-Patriarch of the East. And then F. Crawford added his 50 cents with. Okay, so why we say that he's probably translating, Victor Alexander may have been translating from the Western Peshitta, is because Andrew Gabriel Roth at the AramaicsScriptures.com states that he bypassed the Septuagint, the Latin Vulgate, perhaps the Greek original, and the Western Peshitta, because he probably knows as well that it was a botch up by these American missionaries in the 1800s and 1900s. Them translating the King James Version into Syriac, perhaps. And there's lots of information here about other people that translated and other people's information and so forth, like David Belshka, Yohanan, Lamsa, and so forth. The Church of the East priest from whom Alexander purchased a New Testament in ancient Syriac is most likely to have been in the Assyrian Church of the East. If so, it seems highly probable that the priest would have supplied him with the edition that has been published by his own church, and it could well have been the 1982 print that Meriki and Bauschka have had in their possession. Maybe not. The fact that the Assyrian Church of the East published an edition of the Peshitta New Testament is further demonstration that it is the Peshitta that they consider as the authoritative Holy Scripture. For this reason, it is virtually certain that it is the Peshitta that one of the priests of that church would supply to Alexander. No, it's not. Not if it's the original ancient Galilean Aramaic. If he said the Peshitta is wrong, the Syriac Peshitta is wrong, so why would he give him another copy of the Peshitta? That's silly. It's illogical. And he says there was little textual variation between different published editions and a New Testament Peshitta because there's, as Brock puts it, and goes on about that. He supplies that, and he carries on. And after Victor N. Alexander's conversation with the priest and is obtaining a copy of the New Testament Peshitta, which it wasn't, Alexander says his 1998 account, in his 1998 account, that he resumed translating, but this time from ancient Aramaic. And this is what he stated from his translation project, va.com. As I resumed the work of translation, after all these considerations, I decided not to go back and retranslate Mark and Matthew immediately. The old translated verses were still fresh in my mind, and I did not want to fall in a trap of rushing through them and conforming them superficially to the new reading of the ancient Aramaic. He went to John's Gospel and says explicitly that this was the first time he had read it in ancient Aramaic, or the Galilean Aramaic. He opened up John and started reading the ancient Aramaic of this Gospel for the first time, and he knows the difference. Okay. And this guy, Andrew Chapman, says the difference he would have found immediately in the first clause of John 1:1 can be shown conveniently with the help of Perkins' 1846 New Testament, with ancient Syriac in the right hand column and modern Syriac in the left. Okay, so they got to get off this Syriac trip if he is translated from the Galilean Aramaic and not the Syriac. There's a lot of people out there that say, oh, he says this in the Lord's Prayer, it's actually wrong, all this sort of stuff, and they're not native born speakers. Right? That's his kind of attitude as well. He's not being arrogant or mean or anything. He's just saying, well, I'm the translator, I'm a native born Aramaic speaking translator from Mesopotamia. They're not. Okay, then maybe they've learned from a school, university or whatever like that. They've been taught the modern Syriac. They don't know the original ancient Galilean Aramaic. There is another person, James D. Francisco, who, when we commented him and asked him has he ever met Victor N. Alexander, this professor with 2 doctorates, PhDs in Aramaic and Hebrew, said he did. He says he's going too deep in some places. But yeah, he was pretty good about that, right? About him. He mentioned Rabbi Tobias Singer saying, well, he can't stand the New Testament Gospel and he can't get his head around the Peshitta, the Syriac Peshitta. And he also talked and did a video with Messianic Jew Andrew Gabriel Roth, which is online. So we looked at all those. So he's met all those people. But then he made a claim later on that he actually translated from the Tav Asherate, etc., etc. So I thought, we thought, if he has, then it would be pretty near what Victor Alexander had translated into the nearest English equivalent. It would be pretty close. Okay, variations, depends on how that guy translates it, right? But no, we found out that he's talking through a hole in his head, not to be rude, which I'd be nice here. He actually translated from the modern Aramaic and Hebrew. We figured that out, right? There's more here on Victor Alexander. He opened up John and started reading the ancient Aramaic of this gospel for the first time, and he was awed by it. Here was a clear view of the triune God, the Trinity, from the very beginning of the first chapter. The key word was muta, or mutha in the Syriac, a beautiful word in its theological connotation. Logos and word are such poor substitutes. There is essentially no English translation for the word muta in a theological sense. Therefore, Victor N. Alexander had to come up with one. So he found manifestation. He translated this as manifestation. Okay, this might be the Syriac, so it might not be what he translated, right? As manifestation. Victor Alexander stated, he had translated the word muta as manifestation. Yeshua or Yeshua Mashiach is the muta of Allah or Jesus. Right? Jesus the Christ of God. Despite the fact that no such meaning is given in any Syriac lexicon, what made Alexander believe that this is what the word meant? Okay, these Syriac lexicons we found, in looking at his translation project that we revived, were actually like recreated by the Roman Catholic Church, etc., so that nobody would have what the true meaning of those words actually meant. Okay, that's from his translation project.